We are cruising towards a Chinese Communist Party style digital surveillance future. It's like walking through the doors of Narnia through the closet and coming into a different world. What the government put up was this horrendous piece of proposed legislation, 140 something pages of incursions into free speech, the likes of which we probably haven't seen in 25 years. What if someone who's not benevolent with their intention gets hold of these laws and uses them against people that are just inconvenient rather than being dangerous? We were told time and time again, don't worry, this is voluntary, you won't need it, it's just going to make your life easier. We now do have a digital ID, we are closer to a digital currency, we have incursions on free speech every day. We are slowly, as the frog boils, becoming almost a socialist nation, I think. It's not that far off. Essentially what the government is telling us is, we will take your money, we will take half of it, and we will give you a very, very small fraction of that back if you do what we say with your children when we say it. The rule of thumb has to be, I want the government out of my life. I don't want to be told what to do, what to say. And when you start getting into hate crime laws and when you start getting into the world of requiring government-approved ID to do things, we really are getting above and beyond the call.
Hello and welcome to another episode of You're the Voice. I'm Efrat, this time from Melbourne, Australia, and I have the honor of being here with Senator Alex Antic. Hello, Alex, how are you?
I'm well, Efrat, and thanks for inviting me on. It's great to be with you.
It's so great to be with you. I've been your follower and fan for a few years now, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for all the great work you've been doing throughout COVID. It really helped me, being an Australian living overseas and having my ex-husband here, and now my son also lives here for the past 2 years. This really means a lot to me that there are some honest people that are still remembering what the meaning of being a public servant really is, and really serving the constituents and caring about them. So I really want to thank you for your ongoing stand and your principles.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's very nice of you to say. It feels like a long time ago, but it also feels like there's a lot of lessons that still haven't been learnt. But yeah, it was a bad time. And I mean, you would have seen a lot of it in Melbourne. And, I don't know. I don't know how much difference we made in the end, but, politics is a contest of ideas, and we've got to try, don't we? We've got to try and just tell the truth and fight for what's right. And, hopefully we're doing that.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I don't know how much we managed to actually change, but the fact that there were courageous voices out there just speaking out, showing people that there is a different opinion and view, and people need to take that into consideration even if they don't like it. I think that makes a world of difference. And we need to continue doing that in every area of life. It starts with health, and then we'll cover in the next hour many other topics as well. So just for my audience that may not know, because I have a quite broad international audience, Senator Alex Antic is a Liberal senator representing South Australia in the federal parliament since 2019. As I said, he's been very vocal during COVID against the measurements of the federal government and maybe also state government. But you could see a lot of his work on Twitter, where I was first shocked to see people like you and Senator Malcolm Roberts and Rennick and many others that were really sane, in my opinion. And so I want to dive straight to it, Senator. And these days, the hate speech bill in Australia had passed. And I see that as part of the path to a dystopian, technocratic, globalist reality. And you said in one of your recent interviews, we have enough laws. This is about expanding state power into lawful speech. And you said you'll vote against that bill regardless of the party pressure. Was there party pressure? Were you really the only one voting against it?
Well, I think sadly, as it played out, I ended up only being the only one in either our House of Reps or the Senate that did. There were some that abstained, which was good, but I tend to think you're either in or you're out. So, we want to have people voting against these bad laws, of course. And it's not just this last one. This last one was about a week and a half ago that Parliament passed it here in Australia, it's a sort of too long and convoluted tale to sort of get into the detail, and too boring, I think, as well. I think politicians love to get into the weeds on what a committee said and all this sort of stuff. But the guts of this bill was thrown up in the wake of the horrendous Bondi massacre. As a sort of a reaction that politics needed to do something, in this case, do something in Parliament. So there was this push to bring Parliament back outside the normal sitting weeks. And what the government put up was this horrendous piece of proposed legislation, 140-something pages of incursions into free speech, the likes of which we probably haven't seen in 25 years, maybe longer, maybe ever. I mean, it's hard to know, but it encompassed all sorts of incursions on hate speech. So, people who follow your podcast will well know, that phrase, in my view, and I'm sure in yours, is a bit of an alarm bell, because what does it mean? What does hate speech mean? And, why are we criminalising views like that? We're all, I think probably in agreement, I hope, that things that are illegal shouldn't be said, shouldn't be out there calling for death and mayhem and all the rest of it. But when it comes to hate speech, what does that mean? Something different to you, to me, to somebody else. So that was eventually put up, and
who gets to decide?
Well, who gets to decide? Yeah, exactly right. And it really depends where you draw the line. That particular bill left the door open to this sort of concept of being intimidated, and that can mean anything to anyone. It was absolutely ludicrous. It went away over the course of that sitting week. It came back as I've been saying, it took a horrendous bill and turned it into an awful one, and it was a smaller scope. But what it did was it proposed this sort of model where the government and the bureaucrats, the unelected bureaucrats, the head of intelligence services here, can basically recommend groups be listed as hate groups. We've seen a bit of that through terror organisations, which does also have its problems as well. As soon as you're dictating who can and can't mingle and talk and whatever, despite the fact there's utility in some of it. And it sort of drew this enormous line around hate groups with a very nebulous definition of, anything that might, offend or intimidate or whatever. And so those recommendations can be made to the minister, and the minister can criminalise them, effectively criminalise them, their membership, raising money for them. So now all of that sounds okay when those groups are
without any trial or any
without any
due process.
And actually the bill talks about no procedural fairness as well. So There's no need to tell the people that it's happening. There's no need for them to have a right of recourse through administrative means. There may be some in the courts, but basically it gives the government carte blanche to just say, no, you can't operate as a group anymore. Now, I mean, we always, people, like you and I perhaps, who are a bit absolutist when it comes to, these sort of issues, free speech issues, get accused of being too ideological about them. But let's be real. During COVID, you can well imagine the government getting very uneasy about some of the freedom groups who are doing nothing more than saying, we don't want to have to be told what to inject and when to inject it, and then becoming listed because they're an inconvenience to the government. Now, you would hope that wouldn't happen, but one thing COVID taught me was I was being, and I say this openly, being far too cavalier with the manner in which I trusted government and bureaucracies. I say that openly now. I think it was a massive wake-up call for me to see how things can be pushed in the wrong direction. So that passed, and that's now the law in this country as of a week ago. And that's on top of a range of other anti-discrimination laws that already exist at state and federal level. That's on top of our much more stringent defamation laws that exist here in Australia, which are very different to the United States. So the First Amendment doesn't apply here in Australia. We don't have that kind of freedom. We've got a different model. And then on top of that, 12 months prior, there was a previous round of hate crime laws that were passed, and they have been getting passed in various states in Australia too, but a federal run of hate crimes and hate symbols laws. Now, all of which on its surface I don't disagree with, because, I don't have any love for any of those symbols or words or gestures either. But we've got to be cleverer than that in politics and be able to see the wood for the trees, which is, what if someone who's not benevolent with their intention gets hold of these laws and uses them against people that are just inconvenient rather than being dangerous? And so that's where we're up to in this country. And, we'll talk about all sorts of other things that have happened as well. But the hate crime stuff is a real problem. And I think they are a win for the security state. They are a win for, for those that might potentially want to, one day, I'm not saying it's now, I'm not saying it's the people involved now, but I'm saying we have now set the framework. We talk about this a bit, the sort of the turnkey state where things, if there is a need, can just be flipped in and these groups could be listed, and there's not much people can do about it. And that's not right.
I agree with you. Was there something related to firearms in that bill as well?
Yeah, and that's right. And so the flip side to that was further incursions on firearms laws, importation, ownership. That was completely opposed by my side of politics, which was good. People, once again, overseas who are not familiar with Australia will know that we already at state and federal level have had, and now have even more, some of the most heavily regulated firearms laws anywhere in the world, ever since the 1996 Port Arthur in Tasmania shootings, where a lot of those laws were wound back. We had restrictions on pump action, shotguns, restrictions on semi-automatic rifles. So the regulation was, the system, the ecosystem of firearm ownership was very, very, very tight already. And, as tragic as these events are, the tragic events of Bondi, these things don't go any way to stopping these sorts of events. People will still have the ability, hopefully not, but potentially still have the ability to use other weapons and do a lot of damage as well. And we're seeing this all over Australia now. We're seeing this sort of push on machete bins in your state of Victoria, which I don't know if they've had any impact at all, but I doubt the bad guys are giving their machetes back. So, once again, they're just further incursions on law-abiding Australians, which we should be very alarmed about.
Ever find yourself needing cash but refusing to sell your Bitcoin? That's real life for many Bitcoiners, because most Bitcoin sales aren't financial decisions, they're liquidity decisions. And that's exactly what Ledn solves. Ledn is the global leader in Bitcoin-backed lending. They've issued over $10 billion in loans since 2018 with a perfect track record for protecting client assets. Here's what makes Ledn different. With their custodied loans, your Bitcoin collateral is not lent out to generate interest. No credit checks, no monthly payments, and no penalties for early repayments. You apply in minutes and you repay whenever you want. Ledn also publishes proof of reserves reports every 6 months with full transparency. So if your capital is in Bitcoin, but your expenses are not, you still have options. Ledn lets you unlock liquidity without selling your Bitcoin. Learn more at ledn.io/efrat. That's ledn.io/efrat. You're the Voice is brought to you by Trezor, the original Bitcoin hardware wallet company pioneering the development of self-custody for crypto assets since 2013, empowering individuals with an open source device, enabling beginners and experts to easily and securely hold their coins. I find my Trezor super easy to use and recommend it to my friends and family. Enjoy my 5% discount on Trezor products by clicking the link in the show notes and using the code EFLAT. For sure. And when the people don't have firearms to protect themselves, the state becomes even more powerful. Look at the balance of power. A similar process, by the way, has been happening in Israel, where I used to live most of my life. And around October 7th, we reached kind of a peak of it. And one of the reasons why people couldn't really defend their own families and communities when the October 7th massacre happened is because their weapons were taken away from them consistently for years before. So, and that is a real problem. Now, they started giving it back again now because they understood, people really do demand it and we need to protect ourselves, but it's nowhere near to the freedoms that people in the United States have, for example, with the Second Amendment.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's certainly, I must admit, I did wonder that after October 7, wondering what the situation was in Israel with firearms ownership. You would think that given the situation there, that would be almost a non-negotiable.
Yeah. Right. My ex-boyfriend, who was 55 at the time, applied for a license for a gun after October 7th, and they declined him. He has a background in the IDF, so he could have gotten it. There was nothing that he has no criminal record. There was nothing stopping him from really owning a gun responsibly. And they simply declined it. And to many, many Israelis as well. So it's not great. It makes you think, why would you not allow this for people? Is there a different agenda behind this, right? I mean, people often call me or other people conspiracy theorists, but when you see the state behaving the way it does, you have to wonder, why would you not allow these things that just make sense to happen?
The old joke was the difference between a conspiracy theory and reality is about 6 months, sadly. And
now it's even shorter, yeah.
It might even be shorter now. So, yeah, of course.
Crazy. Okay. And then if I tie that also to, I think you touched on it a little bit, the push for a digital ID in Australia. There was recently also new legislation around age verification, kids on social media as part of like a larger internet control movement. I'm in Melbourne, as I told you, and I have a Substack. I have a blog, and I tried to log into my Substack to manage my work. I work on my blog, and I couldn't because I had to verify my age. And I'm not going to because soon I'm leaving, so I'm not going to do that. But then I tweeted about it, and I tagged Substack, and I sent it to some politicians. And Tyler Green from the One Nation Party, he wrote back to me publicly, and he said, I'm so sorry, like, this is a really bad welcome for an international visitor that comes into this country, just a digital nomad wanting to work here, but can't because all of a sudden I need to upload a photo of my passport. I'm not going to do that. Sorry. No. So what's your take on the whole push to digital ID?
Back to your point about, the so-called conspiracy theories. I mean, it's such a clumsy, stupid title for things that are quite reasonably discussed. I mean, this is the problem, and throwing those names around is quite deliberate, I think, in order to stop people from feeling like they are talking about things which might be legitimate. And as an example about that, the things you've just spoken about, you spoke about digital ID, you spoke about the under 16 social media ban, we've got hate speech laws, we've got firearms restrictions, and of course the one we missed in there is the thankfully failed misinformation and disinformation laws, which were set to give the government even more power about what you say online. They failed last year, thankfully, although I expect we'll see them back. All of those 5 or 6 different issues are all in the last 18 months to 2 years. Crazy. I mean, are we really being told that there isn't an agenda somewhere? I mean, I don't know who it is. I don't know where it comes from, whether it's just natural, coercive. I think there is a push to restrict free speech in countries like Australia as a way of, sort of clamping down on the internet generally. But, I mean, they have all happened in the very, very short to medium term. And it's impossible to really see them in a vacuum on their own. People forget because, of course, they've been happening in a piecemeal fashion. But really, if you look at a broader level, they are all happening at the same time. And they all seem to be focused on the free speech platforms. So let's take the under 16 social media ban. This is touted. So this actually started here in SA with the government here who first suggested it, and seemingly have thought it was a great idea, probably still do, and it drifted into the federal sphere with the federal government who took it on board. The idea was that kids under 16 should be let to just play and go outside and fine. I mean, we're all for that. But the mechanism they ended up used and legislated, and by the way, it was, I think, supported by all sides of politics except for a handful of us, means that they've picked and chosen certain platforms. So, for example, unsurprisingly, X is not available for under 16s, but Blue Sky is still available. They picked on, and they've listed YouTube as being one of them. Now, I'm not sure Substack actually is, but I have heard that Substack is asking.
It's not on the list, but they are asking. Yeah.
And they've been asking for it anyway. So, that's the flip side to it, is it has a chilling effect on the other platforms who figure, well, we're probably, I don't know what they're doing. I'm just sort of assuming, but maybe they have been of the view, well, we'll be next, so we'll just get ahead of the curve, or I don't know. Whatever the effect is, what we know is that kids are finding other ways around it. And
of course.
they're they're not getting the information like YouTube, which, I mean, could not be. I've never seen anything terrible on YouTube. I have to say, I don't think I have. I've never seen anything but, history documentaries and, things on architecture and travel and the sort of things we should be using to have kids inspired. So what's this really about? And also, why is the mainstream media pushing this? We had an enormous campaign with our legacy media here in Australia that were pushing this and championing it. And every day and week and month before the vote, we heard more stories from concerned parents and whatever, never ever hearing the flip side about this, about, well, what if kids are getting their news from other places than newspaper now? I mean, go figure. Yeah. Of course they are. Yeah. So, look, I think we are right in the pincer point at the moment of the free speech age. My view on this for a long time has been, if you went back 25, 30 years and you wanted to get something done as a captain of industry or whoever, you really only needed to get, for example, if you wanted to start a war, you only needed to have a handful of people and platforms involved. Now, with the benefit of X and other platforms, you can get your Substack, you can get your message out a whole raft of different ways. And it's sort of what started as I think a genuinely free speech environment on the internet has now turned into a bit of a problem for the establishment and the globalists who are looking to try to rein it in, and they've had to kind of get creative and try and find ways around it. And, this is what we're left with. We're left with a new version of censorship. I'm really hopeful that it won't succeed. It is worrying that really X is sort of, and I know it has its limitations, we all understand that, but it's the best we've got at the moment. And I think it's changing the world. I think we're seeing things that would never have happened. I'm not sure we would have seen the result in the United States election if it wasn't for that. And I'm not sure that we'd be getting the information, that we all now require. It's really the only platform I use. I'm not here to shill for X, but I've pulled the aerial out at home. Why would anyone ever listen to any of it anymore? It just doesn't make sense.
Absolutely.
So I think there are those that are very keen to stop that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And when you started saying, it feels like there is some orchestrated thing here, like why would they do it the way they do it in Australia? And it also, we know, is happening in the UK. Well, I can tell you that the United Nations has put it as one of its goals in this decade. So there are different documents that are released by the United Nations and then propagated from the head of the United Nations, talking exactly about these things. And different executives around the world are pushing it. There, for example, there is one document called Information Integrity on Digital Platforms, and it was released in 2022, I think, end of 22. And basically, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres argues there that misinformation and hate speech constitute a grave threat to democracy, as usual, public health, climate policy, and social stability. And the policy framework urges governments to take a central role in defining accuracy, legitimacy, and acceptable discourse online. They are essentially, it's again, an agenda that is trickling down from up there to the different governments. We are the policy setters, we're the policy makers, you're the policy enforcers and implementers. You have to take what we give you and start implementing it in your countries. And unfortunately, I think Australia and the UK have been selected to try this out first. There are a couple of states in the United States that are doing that as well, which I found very strange, but it's happening on a global level. One of his quotes from that document is, "It has become clear that business as usual is not an option." Like, we have to clamp down on your views and speech and information on the internet. And that's what's happening right now. It's just a delay of 2 to 3 years from when they hit the gong to when it actually happens in our real life. And it's just so sad to see that, Australians are not aware of that, and most people will not be aware of that. It's just all orchestrated over our backs. So I actually, sorry, maybe you want to say something about that, and then I have a question for you.
I think only to say, I feel as though a lot of the things that happened during COVID, many of us didn't realise the powers were there, to do the things that were done. I'm thinking of, many of the, the regulatory powers there that we could fast track drugs and all these sorts of things. None of us knew that because it was all happening and it had all happened. And it's, once again, this concept of a turnkey society. When the event comes, the framework's already there to respond to it in the manner in which it's being responded to. And I think that's my fear in all of this is we are slowly and in many cases unwittingly, I don't think the political class in Australia in many respects understand, honestly. I think there is a deep lacking in the appreciation of history and also forward thinking. I think that's just the nature of politics, unfortunately, is that everybody thinks in 3-year cycles at federal level anyway. And, in their defence, many of the people, particularly in the lower house of Parliament, so your local representatives rather than the Senate where I sit, have got local constituent issues to deal with. So I think it's very easy to get drawn into the weeds and not to really perhaps see the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is what worries me most. That's where I get my most sleepless of sleepless nights, because, we're talking about it all over the world. You've talked about it on your podcast, I know, a lot, but this issue about a surveillance state, and that's where we're headed. We're headed without, if you freeze free speech, by the way, it is already in Australia very hard to talk about some issues without offending those laws, be they at state level, because, once they're published online, they draw the intra-jurisdictional elements of the laws, or whether they're at federal level, it doesn't matter. So, you really do have that freeze on free speech. And then if you throw over that the digital ID framework, which is being rolled out all over the world with the same motto, I might say, we were told time and time again, don't worry, this is voluntary, you won't need it, it's just going to make your life easier, all the usual stuff. Until you realise that, once this is all done, then once the settings all there, it'll be a requirement for, going to hospital or getting a prescription filled out or collecting your Centrelink or whatever, your benefits. So, of course, it's going to become compulsory. And then, we flip into the central bank digital currencies, which our Reserve Bank here are working on. They're not quite as advanced as some other countries. Yes. And you get this digital surveillance state. Now, 4 or 5 years ago, when I sort of started understanding this and started talking about it, it was considered, far-fetched.
Conspiracy theory.
It was a conspiracy theory, and it's been pointed out now that, well, ever since then, we now do have a digital ID. We are closer to a digital currency. We have incursions on free speech every day and more cameras everywhere than we've already seen. So I think the reality is in the West is we are cruising towards a Chinese Communist Party style digital surveillance future. That's not the world I want to grow up in. That's not the world I want my kids to grow up in, and I know it's not yours. No. So we have to get politics to understand.
Yeah, and speaking of kids, when my son was banned out of Instagram because of the child protection laws, whatever, him and his friends, they all went to other platforms. The kids are so much more smart and fast than we are online. They're not waiting for any government to tell them what to do and where to go. They just found another outlet, It's just ridiculous
which was highly predictable, by the way. Everyone talked about that, and you're right. It was always going to be the case.
I want to introduce you to Abundant Minds because they take a very different approach to Bitcoin mining. Most people buy Bitcoin, but the smart ones mine it straight into self-custody. With Abundant Minds, you can do it without giving up your privacy. Abundant Minds was founded by Bo and Christine Marie Turner, a couple who lost more than $500,000 to providers making empty promises. Instead of walking away, they built a company that raises the industry standard and puts client first, and that's why I like them. With Abundant Minds, you own your machines. They never touch your Bitcoin, never skim a revenue share, and you choose your own mining pool. Their customer care is unusual. Clients speak to a real person for self-custody education, privacy consulting, and even visiting their site. They serve clients from around the world, but US investors specifically enjoy a big tax benefit and 100% bonus depreciation. This is more than just mining Bitcoin. It's about freedom, privacy, and purpose. You can book a free strategy call, see how it works, and mine some of your first Bitcoin for free with a special offer for my audience. Learn more on abundantminds.com/Efrat.
Of course, it's really ridiculous. So I want to, you touched on some really good stuff there. And if you look at Australia in a global perspective, which countries or empires do you think are pulling the strings when it comes to controlling some of Australia's powers and resources? Is it China? Is the US? What's Australia's sovereignty like today when so much external influence is being put on the country?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give it an absolutely thorough view because it is difficult to determine. But I mean, if you go back 50, 60, 70 years ago, we were indelibly tied to the United Kingdom. All of our military gear came from there, all of our culture, all of our, in fact, a lot of our immigration came from the United Kingdom. And over the course of time, past the Vietnam War, that sort of swung back to the United States. We've got a lot of our cultural influences through movies and music and whatever. Now, we know the roles that have been played through the US intelligence services into those areas, into the media, into the music. So I think our hemisphere really started to become more influenced by the United States and its interests, so its private equity influence and, of course, its military-industrial complex, which, started to become very similar to Australia's. In fact, most of our military hardware is American now, most of, not all of it. So that's sort of where we got up to now. Something very interesting's happened in the last 12 months after the US election, where the Trump administration have been really pushing a more populist agenda and an America First agenda. Our government has, from the outside, it appears to be swinging back to the Western Europe, NATO globalist clique. And in fact, they never miss an opportunity to get over there and rub shoulders with the Western European, glitterati. And so it feels to me in the last period we've seen a shift back to that sort of influence away because, the Trump administration's so toxic to the Australian public. I mean, something like a 67% disapproval rating of Donald Trump. I actually think he is the sort of person properly handled who would be very, very good for Australia and will be very, very good for Australia. And Victor Davis Hanson, who I had on my own podcast, said the same thing before the election. So it's interesting to me that ideologically, with a right-wing populist American government, the left-wing government in Australia has shifted back to the European. That hasn't really washed out. It's only 12 months old. But I do think we are seeing now more and more over the last 20 years, the Chinese influence coming through in Australia as well. I mean, you only have to look at what happened in Australia during COVID. And there were some states which really, really rolled out what resembled to be the same sort of thing you'd see in Shanghai or Shenzhen or wherever. So, quite how that's happening, it's difficult to be precise. I mean, I never like to shoot my mouth off without knowing, so I don't know. But what I can say is Australia is increasingly not a functioning sovereign country because we have ceded to, what I think are CCP-inspired globalist incursions on our energy system. We now basically are we're not totally reliant on wind and solar, but we are increasingly reliant on wind and solar. And, we don't make anything anymore. So without a proper functioning baseload power system in this country, which we are increasingly losing, we have no ability to manufacture. And we don't manufacture anything. Here in South Australia, we used to manufacture white goods, not that long ago, I might say, white goods, cars, pharmaceuticals even for a little period of time. So, what a great way to weaken a nation than to do the sorts of things that have been done. And I think if you pull the string line on that, I think a lot of it does come back to China. I think it's just I think there are interests there which can't be ignored. So, if I was the government, I would be leaning into the American administration. We, of course, have a very important Pine Gap base here, which, is a CIA, town in the middle of the country, which, has all of its own ecosystem as well.
I don't know about that. Can you say something about that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, Pine Gap. Well, no one knows much about it. Of course, it's a sort of an intelligence base in the Northern Territory, and I think that relationship with the United States has been really important for a range of reasons. But there's been talk of American troops on the ground. It would seem, up in the northern, and we do have some, but more is what I mean. It would seem that the Trump administration probably are more isolationist than that, and aren't looking to do that. It would seem so. I don't know. I think we are very much in no man's land when it comes to, where we're going in the future and the future relationships in Australia. I think it's a very difficult ground because there is clearly hostility out there between the two governments that we haven't seen in recent times, I think.
And it's quite amazing because Australia is such a rich country in terms of resources and can be sovereign a lot more than what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, we are mineral and resource rich in this country. We've got gas and coal and oil everywhere you look. and we have set about for decades on end demonising any attempts to draw it out of the ground, to sell it. We've got layers of bureaucracy now over the top with environmental, native title, you name the regulation and the reason for not digging up. We had a royal commission into a nuclear fuel industry in this state, and I think it was 10 years ago, which recommended that it would be the greatest thing for the state you had ever seen, sovereign wealth funds, jobs. And it never happened. It just didn't happen because there's just been a real push towards demonising nuclear power and demonising the industry. And the reality is Australians should be completely sovereign. There's no reason why we shouldn't be. Right. We should be able to shut the doors and do everything ourselves here. We've got everything we need. But politics is a bit of a basket case, honestly. Yeah,
so speaking of that, why did you choose politics?
Well, it's a very good question. Look, the starting point is, like a lot of people, I was always interested in it. I was always interested in both domestic and foreign politics. I always watched, but like everyone, I didn't really know much about it. I had a career in the law prior to this, which I think is really important. I don't think enough politicians have careers outside politics prior to getting into them now. It's a real problem. One side we get trade unionists, the other side we get political staffers, and this swamp develops. So I was a bit unusual. There are a few. I shouldn't say I'm certainly not the only one that hasn't had an involvement in politics, working in politics prior to being elected. But it was an interest point, and I got involved with the party, which is our centre-right party in Australia. And one thing led to another, and I sort of thought, well, I'm probably about the right age. I will stand for pre-selection, and I got elected in 2019, just before the pandemic. I had about 6 months prior to that, before everything, took off. And I guess the hackneyed thing is, I wanted to serve the community. Yeah, sure, that's all fine, and I did, obviously, but I just felt like there was, a sort of a need to be involved in some way or shut up about it. And I've said that ever since. In this country, there's a lot of anger about the way in which politics is going at the moment. And I've said to everyone who listens, and I still say it, if you're not involved in the process, that is, involved with more than just on election day, it's involved with political parties generally, then you're really not involved. And you should get involved, because you never know where it leads. I'm proof of that. I don't think the road to politics was not a conventional one for me, and it's been a fascinating experience and a real humbling one. And it gives you the opportunity, hopefully, to do something good. And I try to, but it's hard to know whether you make any difference in this business. But at least it's something different.
And do you think, Alex, that politics is really the major driver for change in our lives today? Do you think it can?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's. I was talking about this the other day from the point of view of the amount of bureaucracy we have in this country now, and increasingly. I think sadly, although people would disagree with me on this, I think politics and the political class in this country are increasingly a rubber stamp mechanism. I see it time and time again. The bureaucratic class will clearly be working on something behind the scenes. They'll throw it up. They'll convince the political class. They'll use their friends in the media to push the agenda, and before you know it, it's law. Any one of the things we've spoken about would have followed that exact same, process, whether it be digital ID or whether, the particularly acute one was the under-16 social media ban. Yeah. Now, I could be wrong about all of those, but the power and the influence in our bureaucracy now, I think, is the preeminent one, which is a real problem. We have created that. My side of politics has been equally to blame for growing that bureaucratic class. And we now, I think, are largely, particularly in this state, a public service environment where I think the politicians largely are just, people that kind of have a vetting process at the end of the trail. And once the train has left the station, it's very, very hard to pull back in. It does happen, but I think COVID was the example there. Every state had a different version of it, but here in SA, our political class basically said, well, this is too hard for us. We're just going to hand it over to the bureaucracy. And they did that. They passed laws in South Australia, which basically just gave the bureaucratic class, the health people and the police carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. they were the most powerful. And it was a very similar model all across the country, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that sort of proved the point. The politicians were largely the ones getting up doing the press conferences, but the decisions weren't being made largely, I think, in the halls of politics. They were being made in offices out in the department area. And, we saw it during COVID. They would just change. I mean, you have to actually go back and remember what the directions were. There were press conferences and there was a new direction, and you can go to the gym, but only between 1 p.m. and 1:05. And when you walk in, you've got to do 2 twists and wear your mask, and you can leave your mask when you leave on. You can't leave it when you're doing a spin class. You can when you're doing weights. It was just, it was an exercise in seeing what, but that was just ridiculous. What you get when you get layers of bureaucracy. And another big wake-up call for me. I think, it really, really, really was another reason why we need to have a thriving, functioning, critical thinking political class.
So did it change anything in the way you approach it, or in how you talk to other people trying to convince them to come to politics? Or I don't know, because you've seen how weak it can be and you still choose to stay there. There must be a good driver, a reason for you.
I think so. I mean, I think we have seen that. I mean, here in SA, we've been my party, we've spent a long period of time trying to get people back involved, and we've seen a lot of really good candidates come through. Not everyone gets everything right all the time. People are different. They have their own views, but we just want people that are prepared to be critical in their thinking, and to really not be frightened to say, I'm not okay with that. I always say if we'd had more of that during COVID, it wouldn't have happened. The Parliament is sovereign. It can do what it wants. It just needs to be filled with the right actors. And I do think so, but it becomes difficult to unpick because it is an interesting place, Parliament. I'm sure it's the same all over the world, but here in Australia it's like a different world. I find it, I have struggled with how to describe this to people who are outside Parliament, but we will go, I'm not sure when this will go up, but we'll go there at the end of today, and tomorrow we'll walk in the door, and having been in the real world for a few weeks on end, that will all just seem like a distant memory once you walk back and the doors shut behind you. It's like walking through the doors of Narnia through the closet and coming into a different world. Because all of a sudden there's this agenda that is going on inside the building that people are not talking about outside the building, and people will get very, very bamboozled by what's important and what's not, and very susceptible to pressure and talk and career progression and whatever it may be. So it becomes this sort of different planet. And, you see good people all the time making bad decisions. You see people that have no idea about other stuff making good decisions, but it is just a different world. And I always say, they talk about politics and Parliament being like a bubble, but it really is actually like a concrete reinforced bunker. And, I often say I think the media just simply do a bit of this as well. It's the thing we haven't talked about. It's probably, it links back to the same issue of who owns and who deals with the media. But, you get the issue of the day just percolates through, and they are telling you what the issue of the day is, and then that's what you talk about, and then that's what gets talked about on the floor of Parliament. So, I think every MP thinks that they're across it, but I just don't think that's the case all the time.
Thanks for giving a sneak peek into what it looks like indoors. It's super interesting. And I appreciate, although I could never do what you do, I really thank you and appreciate the fact that people can do this, because I know it is important to have good people in every system. The systems are so corrupt around us, so that whenever we have some good people with morals and ethics and critical thinking, that just gives us a little bit more hope in this crazy time that we live in.
Yeah.
and it's quite funny that, on top of you have the sign saying based with Senator Alex Antic. So you're a senator and you have a podcast. How does that work?
I do. Well, it's not often, it dawned on me that I'd be like today, I get an opportunity to talk through this job to interesting people, and rather than shut the doors and just have those conversations behind closed doors, I thought, well, why not we just, have it? I know everyone's got a podcast now. I get it.
It's amazing.
there is a It's a unique insight. It doesn't always work in politics because there's always there's a formulaic line, but I don't really care. I mean, I just like to hear what interesting people have got to say, and we've done that. We've had a lot of really interesting people, and I think it's just another way of communicating. That politics is very, very staid. There's a lot of traditional, particularly in Australia, like we've seen through some of the stuff that's happening in the US, the creative use of social media, which, by the way, is not the cringeworthy exercise of having politicians dancing in TikTok videos. Like you can see them getting it wrong every day. It's not that. It's the authentic stuff where you get a little glimpse into what actually goes on that has got people interested, and a bit of the behind the curtain stuff. Now, I don't do enough of it either because it's a task in itself. But one thing we could do is do a podcast, and it's been really good. Yeah. And it's just a when things arise type arrangement. If you meet someone who's interesting, we will try and talk to them and have a bit of a chat in the same way we're doing now. And it's just communicating with people in a different way, which I think politics needs. I mean, it is so...
I love it.
It's so run-of-the-mill sometimes, and, you just have to sort of change it up a bit. And, I think we've seen, and we've been doing it for 2 or 3 years now, and we saw, I think, in the last US election how effective it can be for political candidates if it's done properly, in the right platforms. Because a lot of these people now, and I've no doubt that You're the Voice has probably got a bigger reach than every major news network in Australia. It's just that people can't comprehend that.
It actually does, but people don't. Yeah, they have no clue.
But I think it's just two people yabbering away at each other, and that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
But I know there are literally millions of people that will watch this, so it's fascinating to watch all of this play out, and we've got to keep it because this is the way we continue to get messages out there to people, which doesn't involve someone at a major news network saying, no, you really can't say that you shouldn't, or you should be able to think for yourself about a COVID vaccine. You shouldn't say that. We're not going to print that.
Exactly.
It's so important to have other avenues.
So no narrative control and complete freedom with letting people express their views and actually having a debate over it, which is super healthy, and we kind of forgot how to do that.
Well, it's not healthy for everyone, though, is it? I mean, this is the point. It's not healthy for those that have got a different way of looking at it. That's the problem.
That's right. Are you interviewing people only in Australia or all over the world?
All over the world. We've had some really, really good ones, actually. We've had people like Nigel Farage, who I got to know when he came out to Australia, and we've had all sorts, podcasters from the US. We've had, Victor Davis Hanson, who was great, and all sorts, people from Australia as well. And it's just a good side project as well, because you do get a little bit of an insight into these people, and it's just interesting hearing them talk, and hopefully I can introduce those concepts into the sort of the public generally. I actually just don't know how many people are watching. I'll assume it's nobody. So, but I'm sure somebody's watching. Mum watches. Actually, I don't think Mum watches either. But it's still important anyway, because I'm always amazed by politics. The amount of time and energy spent in polling and focus groups and political science degrees. And I said this a bit clumsily the other day, and I certainly didn't mean for it to come out the wrong way. But the person that's winning politics in this country at the moment is a lady by the name of Pauline Hanson, who's in a different party to my own. But just to illustrate the point that people who aren't, political science majors can do very well in politics if they stand for a cause. She used to run a fish and chip shop here in Australia, apparently, and she's now one of the preferred prime ministers of the country, which is incredible because, if you believe political orthodoxy, you've got to have come through these particular, you've got to have been a staffer and you've got to have done this and you've got to have a political science degree. Whereas politics never should have been like that. It should be exactly people like her and others who can resonate because they get it and they'll fight for you. And we have them too in our party. I mean, I'm trying not to, but, just to illustrate the point that this sort of authenticity people in politics must work it out. Just tell us who you are and what you really believe, not some hackneyed line that you got off series of talking points. I mean, it's boring.
Tired of feeling like your freedom and future are fading away? Do you live in a country with growing inflation, crazy housing prices, weird culture, and a chaotic economy? You're not alone, and my friend Mikkel Thorpe and his team at Expat Money can help. Mikkel is the world's leading expat consultant on a mission to free you from broken systems. He's been an expat for 25 years, lived in 9 different countries, and has helped hundreds of people with second residencies and passports, offshore banking, international investing, and many other essential tools. If you're serious about protecting your wealth and your family, it's not enough to hope things will get better. You need a plan B in another country. The team at Expat Money can help you build it legally, safely, and without wasting years of research. Visit expatmoney.com/eflat and leave your details for a follow-up. In a world hypnotized and sleepwalking towards totalitarian control and digital enforcement, awakened voices rise to inspire change and radiate hope. In December 2024, I had the honor of hosting Professor Matthias Desmet at a conference I produced called New Totalitarian Order. This masterclass is now recorded and available to watch. The conference explores the psychology behind global mass processes, offering a behind-the-scenes look at science, economics, and human potential. It addresses challenging global agendas, mass formation, transhumanism, consciousness, societal change, and the path to transformation. Click the link in the show notes to access 3.5 hours of exclusive presentations, in-depth content, and my fireside chat with Professor Desmet. Use my code EFRAT for 10% off. I hope you find great value in it.
People have had enough with the hypocritical conduct and saying one thing and not walking the talk. I think people are starting to get tired with that. And by the way, Senator Malcolm Roberts was a guest on my podcast a couple of years ago, and we had a very viral episode. And I think people like him really made a difference for One Nation in the country here. Like, people followed him. He's a man of principle, is a really high integrity.
He is. I know Malcolm well. I like Malcolm a lot. I like Pauline. I like Malcolm, and I think they're very honest brokers. They're people that speak from the heart, and I think that's part of the reason why in Australia at the moment that brand is doing very well. And I hope that my side of politics can learn some lessons from that, because I think they are showing a little bit of the blueprint for where we should be. And, politics is changing. It's just a question of how, willingly and how much reluctance there is for politicians to sort of, embrace change and to do things differently. It doesn't mean you have to do everything differently, but, the conservative, the right, the libertarian side of politics in this country still thinks it's 2003. It's still operating in that sort of environment when really everything's changed. And, I just hope the penny drops.
Yeah, it's time to adapt to change. Alex, there was a question that was more related to what we were talking about before, but I want to go into it because it's important for me. What is your view on the role of the state? What the role of the state in our lives? What kind of role should it take? How big or small? How much intervention should it have in our lives?
Well, it's another good question, and difficult again to be crystal clear on, because of course life has changed so much, and we have a different world than we did 100 years ago. But the principle remains true, I think, and that is that I'll always be of the view that it should be as minimal footprint as possible into our lives. Now, that is just clearly not the case in countries like Australia anymore. I mean, I don't think we've ever been more regulated, more impinged upon in terms of our freedoms, and there's thousands of different examples. At state, local, and federal government level here in Australia as well, all of which have an impact on your daily life. You walk out the door and go to work. They would say, you've been through all layers of government and been subject to those regulations, road rules, speed limits, talking on the, all sorts. So to a certain extent, I understand that there needs to be more regulation perhaps than there was, but it is out of control in this country at the moment. It is absolutely out of control. We cannot breathe for regulation. People talk about it all the time. If you want to, we are suffering from a crippling housing crisis in this country, and one of the reasons why we can't get enough houses built is because of the layers of regulation. You have to get past local government planning laws, state government involvement in water and sewerage, for example, many others as well, stamp duty, which is taken at state government level, duties on that, and then even at federal government level, you might get an involvement through something like capital gains tax, and a raft of other ways in which that they're involved in the process. And people wonder why we can't build enough houses. So the solution the government here has been to throw money at housing projects to try and get the government to build houses and so forth. So look, we are slowly, as the frog boils, becoming almost a socialist nation. I think it's not that far off. I think if you look at what's happening in the UK, they've got there. And how do you get back? Well, you get back by repealing laws and removing layers of bureaucracy bit by bit. You can't just go cold turkey on these things and go from 0 to 100 to 0 or 0 to 100. But, like the world operated fairly well on a basis, like on a sort of objective basis, post-war, when there were a minimal number of regulations. Now, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have, all sorts of things, but the same principle applies. And, I think once again, the answer is probably whatever sort of government you're trying to look for. If you're looking for a genuine free market approach, then you would have as little as possible. That's what I'm looking for. But if you like a socialist state, then we're probably not even done yet. We've probably got more and more to go, sadly. But, the rule of thumb has to be, I want the government out of my life. I don't want to be told what to do, what to say. And when you start getting into hate crime laws and when you start getting into the world of requiring an ID, government-approved ID to do things which we haven't got to yet, but we're about to, you really are getting above and beyond the call. I mean, I've heard it said before, and I think it's probably true that, once again, on your trip from work to home or home to work, you probably break 3 laws unwittingly every time. Speeding, turning left on the turning right or whatever, even just the road traffic things, all sorts of other things. And that's not the world I want to live in. That's not the way this country was. This country had a reputation years ago, decades ago, for being happy-go-lucky, the sort of the spirit of what we would call the Aussie larrikin, who was just sort of very much like for people of my generation who would have seen Crocodile Dundee. That's what people thought Aussies were like. I've had American people here that have said, I thought everyone was like Steve Irwin, and then I started talking to them and I realised that was not always the case, and we've become very compliant, and I think particularly in the cities, where I think a lot of the Aussie culture has drifted off. I think it's still alive and well in the country, but not so much in the cities. And we've become very, very, and COVID proved that. I mean, I think we all saw it. People were rolling up their sleeve and, and I know they were frightened and whatever, but very, very happy to dob their neighbours in if they weren't wearing a mask. And, if that didn't prove we need less regulation, then nothing did. And still to this day, people don't, I don't think, appreciate what actually took place.
A small joke. Do you know what some of my friends here in Melbourne call Victoria now after COVID? They call it Danistan. For those who don't know, Dan Andrews was a governor of Victoria during COVID. It was the most harsh place ever. So they just started calling it Danistan, as if, it's really sad. Okay, I've got a good question for you from one of my followers. His name, you may know him on Twitter, Rational Aussie. So he sent me a question for you, and he wrote, why is there not a single Australian politician talking about how dangerous it is to import migrants en masse when they predominantly work in low-skilled jobs, which are about to be wiped away by the combination of AI and robotics? He keeps on writing. Silicon Valley is on the cusp of inventing AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which will automate huge swaths of the white-collar workforce, along with Uber drivers, and yet we don't hear a word from politicians about any of this. Why is that? Do you understand that for every, I'm just reading the last of his quote. Do you understand that for every extra immigrant we import today, that's another $1 of unemployment benefits we have to dish out to them tomorrow? It's financially reckless and socially negligent.
Well, there's a couple of things about that. The first one is there's not much of a conversation going on about AI at the moment. That is true as a starting point. I've heard all the debates about this. I was listening to a podcast myself a couple of weeks ago where they were discussing, I can't remember where it was, but they were discussing the concept of what AI will do. Do we really know what it'll do? The immediate fear is, of course, that it'll take all the jobs, and the point was made there that was the case back when the electric light bulb was turned on, that the candlestick makers were almost in revolt, and it turned out that those jobs stayed and moved and merged. So it's very difficult to know exactly what will happen. I'm concerned about AI. I have to say, I sort of tend to think that it is going to be at the very least a very difficult period of transition. I don't think you can always equate this sort of development back to something like the other example that was used, the loom, the mechanized loom, which was said to have destroyed the fabric industry. And of course, it just meant people had more access to more fabrics. And, so there's always a different outcome than you think. So that's the first thing. I don't think politics has grappled with that at all. I think it's moving so fast that it's the sort of thing politics will catch up to, after a while, and probably won't deal with very well. The second thing is about the issue of talking about immigration and why I'm not talking about it. And I say the reason for that is, frankly, I think part of it is many of the laws. Now, the hate crimes laws make it very difficult to talk about some of these issues without potentially infringing on some of these laws. Now, I think, that's just the reality in which, we sort of work in. It becomes very difficult to sort of talk, freely about some of the issues, I think, across society. Many people are not aware of that, but the state laws make it very difficult in some cases, and it's a risk. I think that's basically the problem. So, which is not, once again, another reason why those hate crime laws are such a problem, because we should be talking about these things. These are things, concepts which, sort of have a resonation, like an effect on the nation. So I think that's a big reason, actually. Many of them are quite new, these laws. They've some through New South Wales, other states as well. And I think that's become a very, very real concern for many in politics.
I have a feeling the public will talk about it, and politicians will have to address it at one point. I don't know how it's going to happen. Yeah, because it is. Yeah. You can see what's happening in the UK and in other countries in Europe. It's a big issue when the borders stay open. Oh, and you were touching about the housing crisis just before. I mean, it's correlated for sure. Okay, I wanted to ask you also about Bitcoin, if you're familiar with it and if you considered it as a freedom preservation tool.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. I've watched it for a long period of time without much involvement or really understanding about the detail. But the concept, I think, is interesting in the way it started. And I was actually listening to a Tucker Carlson podcast about it the other week or the other day. When they were discussing gold and Bitcoin and the situation as we now see it and what's happening in the crypto space and how that's evolving. And I must admit, when I first heard the concept, I was fascinated by this idea that you could go off grid and not have the government interfere with your transactions through crypto. And of course, since then, as was pointed out, things have become much more regulated and mainstream, which I'm sure there are pros and cons about. So I'm fascinated by it, and I do think, there clearly is a future in it. The question is, what does that look like? And it's so volatile at the moment. But my concern is the central bank digital currencies taking the wind out of the sail. And becoming, sort of where you start with this freedom platform becomes almost the antithesis of that and becomes a sort of a tool of control potentially as well. Of course, we saw that in Canada with the truckers movement when when literally the bank accounts were switched off. It was like an early precursor to what could happen. So look, I'm really a passive observer when it comes to the crypto space, and I talk to a lot of people that know a little bit about it, but I don't know much, and I'm interested to learn more because I think we're still in our infancy on this, surely.
Yeah. And I love your answer, and I'll tell you a couple of secrets. First of all, if you want to learn about Bitcoin, probably Tucker Carlson is not the right podcast to do it on. I love Tucker, but yeah, he's not the expert, but I'm happy to share more information with you. That you have some amazing Bitcoiners in Australia that could definitely make sure that you get the right education. It's very different than crypto. It is still decentralized, and it is allowing for a lot of sovereignty and freedom. And the other secret I want to tell you is no matter how much the media narrative and the propaganda is going to tell you that it has changed, it has been co-opted, and you can only access it through ETFs or the BlackRocks or treasury companies, you always will be able to hold Bitcoin in self-custody as your own private property outside of the fiat monetary system. So it is a tool for great freedom. And this is one of the things I teach people about. And CBDC that you've mentioned is on the other side of the spectrum from Bitcoin, 180 degrees. So a very centralized entity controlled by the central bank, with the issuance and the enforcement technologically by the central bank, versus Bitcoin, which is completely decentralized. There is no ruler, there is no issuer. It's a protocol that is out there on hundreds of thousands and millions of servers around the world, just running itself. The other day, one of my guests on the podcast called it cockroach money, that it's going to be here long after we're all gone. That and after nuclear bombs, we're going to have cockroach money, which is Bitcoin. So thanks for being honest about that. Actually, One Nation has released a statement about Bitcoin. I was very happy to see that they support it. And also John Rudick from New South Wales, the Libertarian Party, he also released a white paper about Bitcoin. So I think there are some first seeds and some way showers here in Australia, and I would love to see some more politicians becoming more educated about it to push it forward. And as I said, it's nothing like crypto. Like, people conflate crypto and Bitcoin is the only one that really has all the properties to allow for sovereignty and self-custody. Okay, thank you for answering me on that. On the health front, have there been any major advances since COVID and everything that has happened? Is there anything significant coming out of Australia that we should be aware of?
Well, look, I'm sure there are lots of micro things that are coming out. I think, like some of the people you've mentioned there, Senator Malcolm Roberts and others, we continue to try to look for answers where we can through the process. The process through the Parliament is very, very difficult to get information. I've personally tried to learn more about what happened during COVID through freedom of information, through the Senate's mechanisms, but you have to have the numbers in the Senate, and the government doesn't want to, assist with some of those document finding exercises. I asked in a motion with others for access to the contracts, that the Australian government entered into with some of the companies, just because I think we're entitled to see it. And that was pushed down. And also some of the regulatory processes that took place as well. The regulator in Australia tell us that they were watching and doing their post-market vigilance, but the government won't allow us to see those documents for a variety of reasons. So, we are still, many of us there, and it's I guess it's a rolling feast as to what's going on, but we are still trying to pick up the rocks and find out what we can get, because at some point people are going to learn en masse what happened during that period and be very, very angry. I still don't think enough people are aware of what took place across the board because they just wanted to go away. But I don't think we've pushed for a Royal Commission. In fact, Senator Matt Canavan, who's a National Party senator, moved a private senator's bill to try and establish a parliamentary version of a Royal Commission, massive independent hearing, and that was not allowed. That was voted down. So we've continued to do all that. On a personal note, I guess the experience of COVID has made me very interested in the regulation of pharmaceuticals and big pharma's lobby generally. And so I currently have a bill before Parliament, a private senator's bill, seeking to remove the no jab, no pay laws in this country, which require people to, in order to access certain benefits, certain government benefits, to prove that their children are completely up to date with the Australian childhood immunisation schedule, which is a total insult to liberalism in its greatest sense. Essentially what the government is telling us is that we will take your money, we will take half of it, and we will give you a very, very small fraction of that back if you do what we say with your children when we say it. You go down that path and you don't have custody of your children, the government has it, and that is appalling. So we're trying to look into that. There are state-based laws that are similar but different. And I'm really interested in, we've been asking a lot of questions in estimates of the regulator about the testing of some of these childhood vaccines as well, and how we can be sure that they're getting proper placebo-controlled tests, and we're finding out that they're not.
Right, of course.
So look, there's a lot of work to be done there. A lot of it's education, I think, for the political class as well, because, you know, as I said, if I was to go back to the me when I was first elected in 2019, and you have to say it with a degree of shame, I was firmly of the view that everything was all right, that we didn't have to ask questions, that it was all okay, and that all of the medical space was well looked after. And look, that may be the case in many respects, but it is absolutely wrong to suggest that we shouldn't be asking questions and be looking for proof and be entitled to it on behalf of the Australian people. People should be confident that things are being done properly. And so the questions that I now think need to be asked are questions I would never have asked 6 or 7 years ago. And I think it's really important. So if anything came from COVID, and much of it was bad, of course, most of it was bad. There was one good thing that came from it, is I think that people like me and others, many others, I think have become much more cynical where we should have been from the start, and much less willing to just accept the status quo in politics. And so that's my, for however long I'm involved in this business, that'll be my modus operandi, and it won't matter what anyone thinks about it, and I don't care if no one ever talks to me again. In fact, that might even be really good. But I'll just continue.
I love it that you don't care. This is brilliant. It just shows how committed you are to your vision, and thank you so much for carrying that torch. I saw Del Bigtree on your podcast the other day, right?
Yes.
So he's someone that's definitely leading the way with questioning a lot of those childhood vaccines, and this is brilliant. So where can we direct people to come and find your podcast? Where should they listen to it?
Well, it's very nice of you. Look, so the podcast is across. It's on YouTube, Spotify, and I think still Apple Podcasts as well. It's called Based with Senator Alex Antic, and we try and get guests where we can and talk about those sorts of issues. Del was excellent. He was really good. Just a really interesting guest, and someone that's done a lot of work. He was heavily involved with RFK. It's a great interview, and he was excellent as well. And look, I mean, if you can follow me on social media, on Twitter, it's at Senator Antic, across those platforms. And, it's become so important. I mean, I shouldn't joke about this, but I just rarely bother with, local radio. And I mean, it's fine sometimes, yes, but really my efforts go into, the social media space now, and also with direct emails, which I do to people, which people can get access to via the website. My website's www.alexantic.com.au, and you can sign up there, and we just send out updates as to what's going on here in Australia. Wouldn't matter if you're overseas. Be great to communicate with anyone. And look, congratulations to you as well. I've been sort of watching from a distance your work as well, and I think it's really your platform's going really, really well, and the guests are interesting, and it's just a good thing to do. We have to share info, and all of us will talk to different people and have different interviews. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they don't quite come out the way you wanted, but you're always you've got something interesting to say. So good on you as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm going to put all the links you mentioned in the show notes so people can access that. So please give Senator Alex Antic a follow, and I love the name of your podcast, Based. We love based people. So keep on the good work, Alex. This is fantastic. I love what you do. I'm rooting for you. If there's anything I can help with, please let me know.
Thank you.
And next time I'm in Australia, I will try to make my way to South Australia to see you.
You should. It'd be great to have you. Yeah, and thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being with us. Please take a minute to give this episode a like, a comment, and subscribe or follow. And please share it with your friends so they can also get value and choose to take some positive action in their lives. Till next time.